Hello everyone and welcome to a bonus conversation around doing data science and creating an environment using Docker in this case. There's a motivation for this in part because it's a way of potentially doing it in a lighter weight way than you might do otherwise, and it's certainly interesting, and it could be something you encounter in the workplace. So we'll jump right in. First thing to do is to install Docker. Not surprising. Go to docker.com and download Docker Desktop. That's what you're interested in. You don't need something else. It's Docker Desktop. Whenever you finish the installation process, you want to open up the application and maybe go through kind of the hello world of it, of getting started. So there's you can see there's a Docker run -d p, some port mappings there, port 80 to port 80, and then an image name, which is docker/getting started. So that's a great way to kind of become familiar with it. So you may be asking, well, what's Docker, right? Short answer is it's a container platform, and it allows you to use, it uses virtualization to make things work, and it allows you to execute packages of software which are called containers. Containers are kind of an alternative in a way to virtual machines. The idea is that you layer things together based upon essentially kind of a script, if you will. So you basically define the base operating system, for example, and then you potentially add some additional software that is taking advantage of the fact that you're referencing something else, so that if you have multiple things referencing the same operating system, for example, you're not going to have multiple copies of it per se. So that's kind of the idea. Whenever you're doing this, especially if you're looking at something like in a data science sort of world, you probably want to take a look at the Jupyter Data Science Notebook image or container. The basic idea here is that it is it has all of the stuff that you would normally kind of want available to you. Julia, Python, and R, basically. So a pretty good place to start, and so it's something that you may want to consider. It does rely on some additional, or it does have some additional packages installed, so it's a good way to kind of get started using Jupyter. You can see there that it's on a readthedocs.io page. That's a common sort of place where you'll go to find information, and so there are other alternatives as well. If you don't need Julia and R, you can just install a Jupyter Python sort of environment as well. Additionally, you could, if you're interested in doing stuff with Spark, do PySpark Notebook as well as an alternative to some of the other approaches of editing Spark inside of an environment. Whenever you go to run the image, you basically will see a screen like this. The command line, this is the command that you run at the very bottom of the screen, docker-p, and it's basically mapping port 8888 to what's inside of the image and what's outside of the image. So that's how you'll be able to access it from your local computer. It starts off the process of figuring out if you've got the components locally or if it needs to go out and download them. If it does, then you'll see the downloading screen, and whenever it's all said and done, it'll come up with basically running the program, and it'll tell you the IP address down there at the bottom of the screen to access the notebook with. So you'll basically copy that address into your favorite browser. I find the IP4 version, the 127.0.0.1, to be the one that worked the best for me, but your mileage may vary. But it is basically, at this point, you've got Docker up and running, and you've got an image up and running inside of it with Jupyter Notebook. To access it, you open up a browser. When you open up the browser and point it to that URL that you copy over, it's going to be very familiar to you if you've been using Jupyter notebooks in the past. It starts off with basically just a work folder, and then you can go through and create different types of notebooks depending upon the language you're interested in. The process of doing so is very similar to, it's the same as what you do normally inside of Jupyter. If you have multiple languages, you click on the new thing and you select which one of the notebook types that you want to create, either Julia 1.6.0 or a Python 3 or an R notebook. And then once you're finished with working in this environment, do make sure that you remember to download it so that you can either submit it or maybe work on it elsewhere, because it does work inside of its own sort of file system. So be cautious of putting work in there and not remembering to get it out. An important sort of thing. So what I thought I'd do next is actually do this live, right? Always interesting and fun to try. We'll see how this goes, because nothing like a live demo to get the blood flowing. So I'll blow up the font a little bit so you can hopefully see it. And you can see there, that's the same command that I ran before. It's docker run the port mapping and then the name of the notebook, in this case Jupyter/Data Science Notebook. I hit enter, so it starts up the process. And it's telling me that something is running. So this is not a bad experience. I tested it out earlier. So I'm going in here inside of the Jupyter, or the Docker tool, and I'm looking to see what's running on those ports. And I'm not, oh, there it is right there. So I stopped this. And so it was an image kind of still running there. That's one of the things here to keep in mind with the Docker desktop tool, is that it does allow you to do some simple administration, such as look and see what images are around, and to see what containers and apps have been downloaded and so on. So we'll try this again after I stopped the one that was running, and it started up for us this time. Basically you can see at the end of this we get a URL down here at the bottom. We'll copy that and then open up a browser, and doesn't matter too much what browser we're talking about, and you can see it's just Jupyter, right? Nothing terribly interesting here from oh my, that's so totally different than what I've seen before. You can see that basically the only place you can go, because we're kind of at the root here, is within this work folder. So you can go through and you can say new and then say Python, right? So I want to create a Python notebook, and it goes and it creates it. It does journal a few things out here to the command prompt, which is not that different than what Jupyter does whenever you're running it yourself. And so we can do the typical hello world sort of thing, and do the shift enter and runs, right? So that's the key thing. A good and important thing here to do is to remember to download it. And to do that, you want to say download as, and then you're going to want to pick most likely this notebook, right? And what that's going to do is download it to your local file system inside of your downloads folder, so you can actually interact with it. So that's an important part of this whole process, is to ensure that you do download it when you're done. So that is a brief kind of discussion of running containers to use to do your data science in. As I mentioned, there are lots of different types of containers available to you, and lots of different of the sort of variations. This is just a small sampling, and in particular all we're doing here is looking at basically Jupyter notebooks that are running inside of containers and variations on the theme. You can to learn more about it, go to the URL that I just pasted in, or Google Jupyter Docker image, and you'll probably find this. You can see that there's the base notebook, which is essentially just a Jupyter notebook server with basically the mini Conda or mini Forge version of Python installed. And then there's minimal versions, R notebook, Scrippy, TensorFlow, if you're going to get into some more advanced topics, right, such as getting into more artificial intelligence and deep learning sort of things. Data Science Notebook is the one we've talked about. PySpark, if you're going to want to do some Spark using Python, and then AllSpark Notebook. So pretty much everything with including support for Python, R, and Scala very much. And here, as you can see, kind of the concept associated with the relationships between the types of notebooks. And the basic idea here is that you start with, in this case, from a Ubuntu sort of base, And then it's essentially about kind of derivation and layering on top of, so that you have the mental notebook, and then on top of the mental notebook you might have the R notebook, on top of the Scrippy notebook you might have the data science notebook, and so on. So that's the basic idea of doing this sort of work. So not required, but something you may want to consider, and so gives you something to kind of think about if nothing else. And with that, I've kind of reached the end of the material that I've prepared. If you have any questions about any of the assignments, do let me know. That's what I'm here for, because I'm successful when you are. So make sure that if you're stuck, you let me know. For those of you who are making progress, congratulations. Keep up the good work. There's one or so that's roughly halfway done or close to it. For those of you who are still back on the first deliverable, you want to get after that pretty soon, because you're about to get yourself into what is colloquially called a pickle. So you may want to pick up the pace, because the clock is continuing to tick. So as always, if you have questions about this material, let me know. That's what I'm here for. Stay safe, and we'll speak again next week.